Hi everyone, it's me, Krista. Today we're going to be doing a pastel drawing of a flower together. This is going to be the full length of time of drawing it. There were some parts cut out where nothing was happening, but you're going to see everything that's going on in real time right now. First, I'm going to let you know what items I used in this drawing. We started with a sort of creamsicle color pastel paper by Canson. Me Taints pastel paper in 9x12. I most likely said that brand name wrong. Have my Prismacolor Premier New pastels. New is an NU, and they are pastel sticks because I prefer to use those for bigger chunks of the drawing. And I also have my General's Pastel Chalk pencils. I'm also using painter's tape in order to keep the paper in place because that will make drawing much easier. It's not very easy to draw something when it's moving every which way, especially with something as messy as pastels. And we have the window by the painter's tape being closer to 8x10. I like leaving that little bit of a border for framing. And right now I'm using construction lines and a white pastel pencil to get the basic sketch of that drawing down. I'm trying to use that middle line as a reference point so I can get all of my smaller little lines for the petals and for the stem in the correct places as much as possible, and following the shapes of what it should look like. Which, when I colored in, a lot of these lines do get malformed, and once I get the colors in, I'm able to physically see a little bit better where it is correct and where it's wrong. And with pastel being such a forgiving medium, it's really easy to adjust it as you go. I use multiple iterations of the same line and move it over in different ways to kind of figure out where I'm going with it. And through the video you will see a lot me kind of mimic doing a drawing without laying it down on the actual paper. That is me just kind of trying to figure out what I'm doing and where I want to go next with it. Now I'm adding more construction lines and kind of an upside down cone shape so I can get a better idea, once again, of where to put the individual petals as I go, and to still follow an idea of that shape that's supposed to have. Most of the color of the paper is actually going to be covered up by the end of the drawing. So right now I'm going to just take a moment to explain why I chose this color to lay over. With this being kind of an orange, a pale orange, kind of a creamsicle color, it is going to enhance the pinks and the yellows really well. And it's going to be direct opposite of a deep indigo blue that I lay in the background later, which will also help that stand out more. Basically, it's just basic color theory going on for the selection. So with the pinks and yellows, we are using analogous colors, which, like I said, the pink and the yellow will be enhanced by that orange underneath and makes it more bright. For the blue, it is going to be a complementary color, and those are colors that directly oppose each other, and once again, it just makes it stand out more. It's a juxtaposition of opposite colors that make each other stand out more, since the orange is going to be covered for the most part by that navy. Even though it's covered, the layer still will show through to the naked eye on some level. You're conscious of that. And your brain will register it to show the opposite colors and make that navy stand out that much more. Obviously, we're still doing the outline. Here I'm trying to make sure I pay attention not only to the petals I am drawing, but to the negative space in between them. You want to make sure that those shapes match as much of what you see for the parts that are in between the petals as much as the shape of the actual petals. It helps a lot with placement and with the proper shapes and knowing where each petal goes and how they kind of interact with each other and with the background. And there, obviously, I felt like the shape was wrong, so I used a triangular eraser to get rid of it. Usually a kneaded eraser works best with pastel and charcoal. I don't have any right now, so I use the eraser I have. Even with the technically not correct eraser, you can see it came up pretty easily. Once again, that's one of the beautiful things about pastel, is it is such a forgiving medium. When you mess up, you can fix it very, very easily. And actually, I use these pastel pencils a lot, even for non-pastel drawings. I use it as a base layer for colored pencil drawings because it's something that will not show through to the colored pencil, because if you do graphite underneath, you can definitely see that harsh graphite line. And I will also use pastels under water-based paints because the water will eventually wash it away once you have that base layer of paint going on. Basically, pastels are your best friend in a lot of different ways for art, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. One of my favorite pastel works I ever did, I actually mixed the background with water. So I'd lay down a layer of pastel and then put water over it, and gave this beautiful watercolor effect, but it was more opaque than watercolor on a single layer. And you could get all these really cool patterns in the background with it. It's a lot of fun to experiment with this medium. Like with a lot of mediums in art, that's the whole point of drawing and or painting, is to kind of play with everything and get an effect you like. And honestly, that's the quote-unquote joy of painting, is to just play around. You know, quote Bob Ross, happy little trees. Let's just feel it and make it happen. With pastels, you do want to make sure that you are using a thicker paper that has more tooth. And when I say that has more tooth, you want to make sure that it has a little bit of a grip to it, like you feel it, there's a rough side. You don't typically want to use it on a super smooth paper because it does not play with that very well. It's going to come right off. You want something that has that little bit of tooth because it grips onto the pastel, or more accurately, the pastel grips onto it. So you can use pastel paper, you can use charcoal paper, you can even use certain types of watercolor paper. You definitely do not want to use bristle board or even a lot of regular sketch paper, and I would say even some mixed media papers would be way too smooth for it. You want to feel that paper and you want to feel that little bit of roughness, but you don't want it to feel like sandpaper. You just also do not want it to be super duper smooth like vellum. And honestly, you don't really need to do an outline like how I'm doing it. Another technique would be just to go in with a base layer color, which for a base layer color would just be kind of the medium tone of the color you want throughout certain parts of the drawing. You could easily just use that to kind of get a basic idea and outline, which I've done in the past. For some reason, doing it this way works better for me. And the other way works a lot better for people who tend to have more of a 3D type mindset, because when you have the base layer, it's almost more like sculpting shades, whereas this is definitely more of like a drawing technique. And doing it the other way is also more painterly. And as you can see, I'm trying to get a couple of the wavier lines in the petals, which are more of the imperfections, because any petal is not going to be just like a perfect little oval with a slight tip at the edge. They're all going to have little folds and waves at the edges and inside. And I know, at least for me, one of the difficult things about drawing flowers is how much the petals overlap on top of each other. It can be kind of difficult to keep track of that sometimes. And we're extending some of the length of the lower flower petals in order to just make them a little bit longer, a little bit thinner. They just want to be the skinny legends they are. here we are starting the background. I am done with that sketch. It only took about 15 minutes. I start with a pastel pencil, but figure out obviously that didn't work. It was a blue pastel pencil. Now I'm switching into what I believe is called indigo blue in the Prismacolor line. At least that's the name that it used to be in about 2006 to 2009 in the colored pencil line. I'm not positive what the name of this is in the pastel line, or was, because obviously a lot of those names could have changed between then and now. It has been about 10 years. I also want to mention, obviously, I am not sponsored by, nor am I affiliated with any of the brands featured in this video. I just have what I have. A lot of it was gifts when I was younger, a lot of it's stuff I bought later. Everything was paid for either myself or a family member. None of these companies want anything to do with me because obviously I don't have a big following, and I usually do scary drawings. I'm usually a horror artist, so that doesn't usually compute very well with big companies. And obviously I'm laying down that base layer for that background. It doesn't really matter how sloppily you apply in pastels because you can always use your finger or some other sponge applicator to blend it out a little bit better. As you can see, I do layer pretty heavy-handedly because I like having a lot of the medium on that paper so I can move it around. And I like using my fingers. You will see some of the sponge appliances throughout occasionally, but I've noticed, at least for me, the oil in my hands does help blend it out really well. You do need to make sure, though, if you've been using pastels for an extended period of time, that you lotion up your hands, girl. Lotion up, because that shit dries out your hands so bad. You can get cracked so easy. Nobody wants chapped hands. It just does not feel good. Other than my perceived ability with blending, I think part of me also just likes using my hands for pastel because it subconsciously probably just reminds me of finger painting. And who didn't love finger painting as a child? You will occasionally see some dust flying around. These are chalk pastels, so they are pretty dusty. You do have to blow on the drawing quite a bit to get the excess debris off. But I also want to leave a little bit of a disclaimer. If you have some severe breathing issues, you should probably be wearing like a half face mask, a medical mask, while you're doing this so that you aren't directly breathing in all that debris. I can't imagine this is good for people with asthma or any other respiratory issues. Also, in between layers, a lot of people, once they feel they have a decent layer down, will spray it with workable fixative, which is good because it sets that layer you have. It's a lot like a makeup spray. Sets what you have down, finishes that layer, and then you can layer over it. You can still blend a little bit with that layer you had previously, but for the most part, it just is like a nice little setting. And it adds a little bit more tooth back into the paper, and you can go over it in more layers. And we all probably know by now that a lot of drawing and a lot of painting is just layering over and over and over again. When you do use that fixative spray, though, you want to make sure you use it in a very well ventilated area. You should really use it outside only. If you do choose to do it inside, you need to do it next to an open window and or a vent that is on and can suck that spray right out, because that shit is very toxic. You also want to keep it away from any pets or any children, because once again, very toxic, can put people into respiratory failure pretty easily. The Fixative Spray that I'm currently using is one that I've had for probably 7 years now. It is by Grumbaka, and it is matte. And once again, I probably said it wrong. I'm just pretending like I know what I'm doing. But this is a matte workable fixative, and it's also a non-yellowing fixative, which means that it's going to keep your drawing from yellowing later. And I'm not sure if this one is fully UV resistant, because I know a lot of these sprays that I use over paintings are, but I don't believe this one is. And there, for that brief moment in between the petals, I was using a sponge tip applicator, and you probably couldn't see it because of how little it is, but it looks like one of those eyeshadow sponge tip applicators, the original one. So if you happen to have a bunch of those that came with makeup that you have, you can probably use that for a pastel drawing instead. The second one I have is like a little plastic piece that has different sized and shaped tips to put on it. So technically, you probably don't need to get the pastel all over your hands, but in my opinion, that's just a fun part of the experience, is having that stuff all over you. While filling in the background, you can see I'm using a line closer to the flower and using smaller strokes. The closer in I get to that line, and the further out I get, the broader and more wide the strokes are. A good thing about those General's pastel pencils is that they all have an eraser on the back, which you just saw me use to kind of clean up a little bit of that blue that I got in spots where I didn't want it. My main goal for this background is to have it all be the same tone without any shading. I just want it to be kind of a flat matte shade. And this deep blue is going to be really, really nice with the other colors that are used in the flower later, because it's going to contrast really, really well and make those colors pop way more. Having the bright colors next to a blue that dark, once again, is going to have more contrast. Because of the proximity to that dark color, it's just going to make those bright colors seem 20 times brighter. And we're going in all sorts of different directions with that background. because unlike with some mediums like colored pencil where you want to keep a lot of the line strokes in a very similar fashion, with pastel, once again, doesn't matter because you just blend it all out. A lot of drawing and painting is just repeating the same steps multiple times in different areas. And as you can see, we're just still following those same steps to finish up that background. look at that. The background's pretty much done. Finally, 30 minutes later. Now we're starting to fill in some yellow on the petals with both a pencil and with a pastel stick. On this particular flower, there is a lot of yellow, especially towards the bottom where the stem meets the petals. It gives an feeling of inner light, which is really beautiful when it's finished. And we're erasing the plumb line that we had in the middle to kind of gauge where we were going with all the petals, because since the outline's done and the background's done, we don't necessarily need it anymore to gauge where we are. Here you can definitely see what I was saying earlier about that background and how the bright colors are going to play really well off of it, because that yellow is just so sunny and bright, and this green that's going to be laid down on the stem is the same way. When I draw or paint, I tend to go between a couple of different colors to fill in different spots and jump back and forth a lot. I don't tend to just do one part start to finish in one shade only and then add over another shade. A lot of artists do that, where they will start with one base shade and they go over it with different colors. I like kind of, like I said, bouncing back and forth, because for me it makes it easier to kind of gauge what I'm doing. It makes it easier for me to gauge shades wise where I need to be in different parts of it because of that. When I have more colors laid down, the better I can understand what else it needs. Here we are adding in a little bit of a brown, because for once I am going to be using some more neutral shades. It's not going to just be the bright greens, yellows, and pinks. I'm going to be throwing in some browns and some more olive greens. Palm of my hand looks a little bit like a Smurf right now because of all that blue. When you're drawing with pastels, you do kind of want to clean your hands in between, because it's really, really easy to transfer color in between. Because if you don't want that blue anywhere else, you should really wash your hands in between so that it doesn't get everywhere else. For a lot of the deep shading in that stem area, we are again using that indigo blue from the background, which is nice for a couple reasons. First of all, it's going to give more depth than black, especially when you layer other colors with it. And also, it's going to pull that blue that's in the background into other parts of the drawing to make it slightly more cohesive. And you're going to see me repeat this a lot. I add a layer, I blend, add another layer of a color, I blend, and we once again just go back and forth until it looks right. And here you can definitely see the blendability of this material because I have four different colors going on here, and you can see when I blend out with my finger that they become really seamless. That yellow makes me so happy inside. I love bright colors. You probably know if you've seen any other videos, or any of my other art for that matter. This is what happens when you grow up watching Rainbow Bright and Jim and the Holograms and Care Bears and all those super bright children's cartoons from the 80s and early 90s. And we're pulling in even more colors. There's a bright red that I'm starting to add in, and there's a cream off-white that has a yellow tint. It looks pure white on camera, but it's definitely a cream. Filling in those little shapes that are almost like the leaves that you draw in kindergarten and grade school. That shape. And just going back and forth again between different colors. You'll also notice that some of my pastel sticks are really short. No, they haven't been used to be that short. I like breaking them into smaller pieces for me to be able to use them a little more easily. I have kind of small hands, so it gives me a little bit more ease of control this way. And now we're trying to add in a dark reddish brown, which this color works pretty well on just the paper itself, but when you try to layer it over other colors, it must be something about the pigment they use to get that specific shade. It does not layer well over the other pastels. I've noticed that same issue with certain blacks that come in a lot of the Prismacolor pastel packs, that there are just certain blacks that do not layer well at all, and the blacks tend to feel really waxy versus chalky. If you are having issues with it layering on top of other pastel though, you can always erase down to the paper and then use that shade there and then just blend it with your fingers. So that is a way around that issue. You can also use workable fixative to give you a new layer. That also helps with that issue. I switched to the Pastel Pencil for some of the detail work where I want some definite lines to add that little bit of extra sharpness in those areas. I'm using a heck of a lot of different colors in order to get a certain effect. When you're drawing or painting, it's not necessarily just a single color mixed with white and or black to get that tone. If you look at it, different lights will reflect different colors. And a lot of the time, you can just play with colors that aren't even necessarily there to see if it gives you the effect that you're looking for. Don't be afraid of color. I've seen a lot of artists that are, and you can't just limit yourself to what you physically see. You need to be able to have that fearlessness and put it down, and if you mess it up, oh well, you learned something from it. In my opinion, a lot of art in creating is kind of fumbling through mistakes, learning from it, finding ways to fix it. If you don't fail, you don't learn. And this is something I've said in multiple jobs I've had. I'd rather make a mistake and learn from it than never make the mistake and not know what to do when that situation arises later. Take it as a learning experience. And now we're adding in a color which I would describe as almost like a neon red. You can see it in the petals above the stem. It's not quite pink, it's not quite red, it's somewhere in between, and it's really bright. And I might not be able to describe the color well, all I know is I like it. I do wish sometimes that these packs were like a makeup palette where it had the names of the colors underneath. I know they have codes stamped into them that wear out, so honestly for most of these I have no idea what the color name is, at least for the pastel sticks. For the pencils I can look. And there's a new color introduced. It is a tan pencil added into the stem. I can't keep track of how many colors are used at this point, nor do I care to. You can do that at home. Here I started messing around with my camera. As you can tell, it went kind of sepia toned. I'm still learning how to film all this, and once I had my background in and some of the base colors, I realized very quickly that the color on camera was not matching what I saw with my naked eye, and you'll see me kind of going back and forth to try to match that, so I apologize right now. It's going to shift quite a bit. The good news is you can see how they would look if they were done in these different colors. It's like an Instagram filter for your drawing, which you should never do. And I do throw in a little bit of black at certain points at the edges of those leaves, which, once again, major art rule that you're taught in school is to never ever use black, especially not straight black, because it flattens out your image. But I do what I want, so there's that. Here comes more camera tomfoolery. You're going to see the shade shift a couple of different times until I settle on what I feel is the closest to what I am seeing in person. I'm sorry. I do settle on a camera setting soon-ish, I promise. If you suffer through this, you will get a better idea of what it looks like. And I'm sharpening up some of the edges in the background a little bit more, because when you go from foreground to background, some of that chalk is going to get in other places, and you do need to go over certain lines again just to get that sense of sharpness again. So my way of cheating the straight black thing is to use black and then use another color directly over it or under it. Usually it'll be either a blue or a magenta. Magenta is really good under straight black because it gives it that extra warmth and brightness to make it not feel as dull. Here we're just using that indigo blue with the black. There's that olive green I was talking about earlier. And once again, we're bringing in that kind of cream, pale yellowish white. And here we're using some straight up white. And I'm trying to mimic some of the little furry bits that some flowers have on their stems. You know what I'm talking about, little soft fuzzy pieces. That's a technical term right there, soft fuzzy pieces. Because I keep all of my supplies that I'm using out on the desk that I'm currently using, I'm having to push away those pencils because they're round and they are trying to attack the drawing. How dare they? Look, now we're starting some petals and we're not just obsessing over the stem anymore. Good job. Since I did the background first, that blue is gonna just incidentally get mixed into what I'm doing occasionally. I'm trying to do everything I can to prevent it, but it is gonna still happen. And here my left hand is making a special appearance, gripping a tight fist in the corner. I must be thinking. And I think I just added some black into the background there and then decided I hated it, so I put more indigo blue on top to cover it up. And we're back to being finicky with that stem, at least for now. And jumping back to the petals. Told you I like to jump around a lot. And now we're back to some yellow. To add in more of that yellow that's in between, and you'll see me moving my hand over the paper without making strokes because I'm apparently thinking about the process of what I'm doing as I'm doing it. And we've made it past the hour mark. Thank you so much. The stem looks like it's basically done. Maybe. I have a ridiculous amount of pastels. I think I have the 96 count from Prismacolor and then a 24 count too. You don't really need to have a lot of them. You can get a smaller set, a much smaller set, and still be able to mix a bunch of different colors. Because honestly, if you're new to it, starting with something smaller and playing around with it and then maybe getting more later is a better and more cost-effective way to go. And right there's a good sample of what I mean of like how well they can blend. I just put some white over that pink, and the white's not going to be pure white because it's mixing into that pink color. If you want it to be pure white at this point, you almost have to either erase that section first, so you're just getting the white on the remaining paper, or you need to layer it a lot more so that that color becomes more pure. I hope being able to see this in real time is helpful, because I am sure that being able to see how everything's applied and then having a slight voiceover of exactly what I'm doing can be more instructionally helpful. I'm not sure. I also don't actually claim to be a teacher. I'm not an art teacher. I don't have the credentials for it at all. I'm mostly a self-taught artist. But I think being able to visualize what's going on in a non-sped up version can be more helpful, because you can physically see what's going on a little bit better. It's not as good as just doing it, honestly, because it's a lot of trial and error, like I said earlier, and you're not really going to know how to do it until you actually just do it. Just do it. And we've still got a long way to go, still about 2 more hours. If you don't already have a drink and some food, might as well get that now and just sit back and relax. And now I'm just repeating a lot of the same steps, but in individual petals. The difference with doing individual petals is you're kind of figuring out not only the colors and shades and shading, hues, blah blah blah, art terms. Okay, let's start that again. we're doing each of the individual petals and kind of gauging where they are tonally and color-wise in comparison to not only that individual petal, but with the rest of the drawing. I know, at least for me, I have to adjust a lot more after I have more done. Like having that background in, I have to adjust what the different colors are because that's a reference point for me. Having the stem mostly done is a reference point for me for the petals and for the background. And the petals will also be reference points for each other. So basically you're taking all of these different points of this drawing or any drawing or painting and kind of going back and forth and figuring out exactly what it needs to be and adjusting it as necessary while you're kind of scanning everything and attempting to figure out where it needs to be. And obviously I love using very bright colors in all of my art, but a lot of these colors you can use and then dull down by layering another color over it. That kind of neon red or bright pink you can kind of dull down by putting some olive green on there. You just want to use complementary colors out on the color wheel. If you want me to do a video that explains color theory a little bit more and how to use the color wheel, just leave a comment. I'm laying certain colors in certain places so I can keep track of the individual petals a little bit better as I go, and I apparently just need to keep going back down to that stem and layering over it. This is what happens. You become obsessed with a certain part of it. Until it drives you crazy and you just cannot handle looking at it anymore. And you just wish it didn't exist. That's a normal part of my process. I go through stages of hating it, and then being okay with it, and maybe loving it. I blended out the stem, and we're going to go over it and redefine it. It's just the layering that never ends. It goes on and on, my friend. See how that section got muddied from me using the little sponge tip applicator to blend? You usually want to make sure that, especially if you're going against yellow, unless you want to muddy it up, that you're using a clean one, because that's what happens when you don't. Still using that darker navy blue for some of the shading, even in the petals, because once again, I'm going to keep repeating this multiple times, I don't want to use straight black right away, because it can really dull out the effect and give it a lot less depth. But if you want to give an effect where it's more of like a graphic type of drawing or painting, think more like a graphics design thing or more like comic books where you want those definitive black lines, it is the best way to use straight black. If you want that effect, go ahead and do it. All rules are kind of meant to be broken. You won't learn what works and what doesn't work if you don't make the mistakes necessary to find out. Gonna be repeating myself a lot because this is a 3-hour video and that's just gonna happen. Gonna sound like a broken record. Sorry about it. Sorry, not sorry. After many layers in, I am finally adding in some black pastel pencil into that stem because I have an adequate amount of different colored layers underneath it. Throwing in some yellow pencil. Then navy pastel chalk sticks, and then going over again with that black pastel pencil. Navy, indigo blue, same color in my brain right now. I feel like that stem is looking more and more like a succulent. Random side note, This drawing was not done in just a straight up 3 hours of not moving or leaving. I usually stop after every so often, walk away. It's a good idea to step back from a drawing or a painting to kind of see what it looks like from further away, and sometimes just to return with a fresh perspective on it. Because when you are obsessing over something for a long period of time like that, it's really easy to get caught up in the little details instead of paying attention to the larger picture and what it looks like possibly in a gallery setting or in a home setting where you're going to be seeing it from much further away than you are while you're actually creating it. Because if you're nearsighted like me, you're basically just doubled right on top of it. And goodness knows, I need my coffee breaks. And food. Food and coffee are very, very important in the creative process. I think I also took a nap at some point during this. Naps are important too. Necessary step. The underside of my hand looks like I've been working on a car engine for a long period of time. That's fun. I promise that those petals will eventually be worked on, and I won't just keep doing the stem over and over again. I know some people wear gloves when they use pastel. Usually like latex gloves or some kind of plastic gloves. Some people put sandwich bags, the little plastic sandwich baggies over their hands. Just feel like that would complicate things more. I kind of feel that to be able to understand how much pressure you're applying, you need to physically be able to feel it by gripping the pastel without a barrier between. But if you can't stand touching one, a pastel stick, or you just don't want to get your hands dirty, I suppose that is a good way to do it. Adding in a softer pink, so we have another color in there with that neon red or just darker magenta pink, and the yellow and the blue. I'm trying to use different colors and different petals at this stage so I can kind of keep track of these shapes I already have outlined. I'm pulling a little bit of that pink into the stem as well. That, once again, is to just have the color move throughout different parts of the drawing a little bit more, because it's just more cohesive to the eye. And there's no specific formula for like how to color something. I know a little while ago on one of the DeviantArt forums there was someone asking how to select colors, and the normal suggestion was, well, basically look at other things, look at other artists, see what works together, play with the different colors, look at color theory, and basically just figure it out. They were expecting there to be a kind of formula, like A plus B equals C, to where you could just reuse that formula over and over and over again. And the truth is that each piece is going to have a different color story, or at least it should. And it depends on the emotion you want to convey, if you're doing a character, how you want the character to work and look. There's just a lot of stuff that goes into it. You can't just say, these are the colors I'm going to always use for every single character or every single drawing or painting. And this person just didn't seem to understand that, and I hope at some point they do. But I guess I don't comprehend where that type of thinking comes from. This isn't a mathematical equation. It's not a scientific experiment where you have to just keep testing it over and over again to get the same results from different test studies. It's more about, hey, I tried this, I like how this looks, let's try something different, or let's see how this works in a different context. If you want to do paint by numbers, they sell plenty of paint by numbers books, and even velvet posters that are paint by numbers. For this stage, I'm doing a lot of the petals in flat colors, like I said earlier, so I can kind of keep track of my original outline a little bit better, at least at this stage, and we'll kind of add in more layers and shading later, trying to do the white edges towards the top so I can keep track, once again, of where each petal ends and starts. A lot of these shapes and placement do kind of move around later because that's just how I work. I once again just gauge where everything is and adjust as necessary. Include shapes, colors, sizes, all of it gets changed around. And once again, I like pastel because it's super easy to do that. It's a very forgiving medium. Sharpening up some edges with the background and some of the pieces of the flower that just meet that background area. That sponge tip applicator blender with its shape is really good for getting into some of those tight areas because I'm not even sure my pinky could get in there that well. My bright pink hoodie came out to play because the room got cold. Yay, December in Michigan. What fun. That peach pencil is a good transition shade. It works a lot like if you're doing eyeshadow. Having that transition shade in between keeps the two separate colors bright, but provides a wonderful little smooth transition for it to go between. There I was using the pencil kind of more at an angle on its side instead of using the tip because I'm covering a wider area. I bet we're both wishing right now that I was more like Bob Ross and could have just cranked this out in 30 minutes. Talked about happy little trees and some squirrels and beating the devil out of that paintbrush. But unfortunately, I can't do this in 30 minutes. Wish I could. It would make both of our lives easier. From blending, I lost a lot of that nice yellow that I had laid down, so that was just me sharpening up. Now we're blending again. It's just a big game of blending and resharpening and blending, going back and forth, oscillating between the two. You can't really see it, but that pencil I went in with was that peach again because it's a great transition between that pink and that yellow. And when I'm doing the outlines of those petals, and with a lot of outlines, unless it's the initial sketch, you'll notice I try to do it in one kind of sharp, continuous line. That way you get a more clear and defined line that has a sense of purpose. When you do the little tiny, like scratch lines right next to each other, it's more uncertain, which at this stage we don't want it to look quite as uncertain. We want it to look like I am definitively putting something down. Might move it, but if that line stays in that place, it is a nice, strong line. Finally, a use for all those little makeup sponges you get that you never use. been long, but at least we have petals now. I'm not just working on the stem over and over again. We're just moving back and forth through the petals. More work is actually getting done. It is getting closer to completion. It might not seem like it, but we're getting somewhere now. I'm using that pastel stick for some light lines to give the insinuation of some of the lines and folds that you have in Petals. I, of course, just blended it out, but we're giving an indication of some of the veins and lines that are in a flower petal normally, those little imperfections. I realized that some of those petals were way too short, so I do start extending them out a little bit more, so the flower has more of an opened appearance versus a more closed off appearance. Looks like it's further in that blooming process instead of just starting to open up. Using a bit of a medium blue pencil to try to add a little bit more shading. As you see, because it's mixed in with that pink, it is coming off as a more purple appearance. If you're still here, we are about halfway through this drawing. Isn't that exciting? The nice thing about the color of this paper, which I didn't really do, with the tone I selected, I could have definitely left some empty spaces and just used that color to build off of as a transition. So instead of throwing in that bright yellow, I could have used it as the paper as that yellow. And I could have used it in some spots that are next to white. I didn't, but I could have. And if you do something like this, you can definitely do that. If I would have done that, if I would use that paper more as a base shade, I could have saved quite a bit of time with this drawing. Hindsight's 20/20, right? I also use that edge of paper that's behind the tape as a way to clean off the pastels. I also use the tape during various parts to do it too. Especially with the lighter color pastels, they can get covered in some of the deeper colors like the indigo blue. And, you know, it can add colors that you don't necessarily want due to the two mixing together. Doing a quick swipe on a scrap piece of paper will clean that off really nicely for you. I started using the eraser on the back of one of the pastel pencils to lift up some of the color. I do end up switching over to a triangular shaped eraser I have. Yeah, there we go. The best way to do this would be actually with a kneaded eraser, because those pick up this kind of medium much more easily. Still worked. The reason I wanted to pick that up is I wanted that yellow to be just that little touch brighter. Just alternating between the different petals with pinks, blues, peaches, whites, and yellows. Just repeating quite a few of the same steps. Again. The effect with a lot of the petals here is really nice, and part of me wishes I could have kept that as I added more details later. There's a bit of a translucence to the way I have it color blocked. It looks more like there's light shining through the actual petals, so they're a little sheerer than the final product ends up being. Not to say I dislike the final product, it's just something to keep in mind. I do want to make a differentiation. I know I've mentioned earlier that these are more of a chalk pastel. These are definitely not oil pastels. Oil pastels work in a completely different way. I'm pretty sure you can use a turpentine or some other paint thinner to thin it down a little bit with those, but they are definitely much harder to blend than this kind of pastel, the chalk kind. This is kind of off topic, but not really. Part of the reason this video is so long and is 3 hours is because it's not a time lapse, it's not sped up, but also because I want to take the time to try to put out a drawing or a painting. I used to try to rush through them to get them done by a certain point, and I learned if I did that, I didn't learn as much through the process. A lot of this is kind of a practice makes perfect adage is truth, to where the more you practice, the more time you take, the better you get at it. I am by no means the best artist out there. I wouldn't even put myself in that category at all, but I'm definitely much better than I used to be, and I would not have that improvement if I didn't spend the time to get there. I've been drawing and painting off and on since basically forever. Started drawing when I was a small child. I've been painting on and off since high school, so that's been over a decade since I graduated high school. It's just a lot of practice. practice and a lot of learning. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not always necessarily about natural talent. It's about not being afraid to make mistakes, and when you do make mistakes, learning from them and wanting to be better and having that determination to push yourself through it to become better. I think looking at artists who you aspire to be is a good idea. I also think that you can't let it get to a point where you think everything you create is worthless, because that becomes an issue. But we're gonna kind of get out of my little philosophy on art and on improvement and try to get back more into what I'm actually doing in the drawing. There's only so little base layers they have to do for a couple more petals. We're getting there till I change everything, which does happen. That's what happens. Starting to slowly but surely extend some of those lower petals and reshape, and we're going to be doing a lot more of that here pretty soon. Good news is most of the base layer for the petals are done. And I haven't touched the stem in quite a while. Rejoice in the fact that I haven't messed with the stem in a while. Now that we have some of the base layers down, we're going to be doing some more detailing and some extensions. I'm also extending the background to follow some of the negative space shapes a little bit more, which we briefly talked about earlier. And basically, we're just trying to get the shapes and the feeling of the overall drawing right, then adding in the details that we need. There's going to be a lot of extension of petals, especially the lower ones. Towards the end of the drawing, a lot of those petals kind of touch the edge of the tape, therefore they go off the page, which creates a better composition anyway. It's not all just contained in one little spot as much. It ends up not feeling as cramped as it did before we started doing this stuff. I'm using that indigo blue to redefine some of the outer shape of all those petals. There we are using some white, pink, and peach to insinuate some other petals that are kind of hidden behind our main ones here, to kind of try to help insinuate that this flower is a three-dimensional object and not just a flat item, not a 2D one. Congratulations! You've made it to the 2-hour mark. Past the 2-hour mark, actually. We've only got about another hour and 15 minutes to go. We're about 67% done. Yay! And right now it's 5:30 in the morning. I have my cup of coffee. Hopefully you guys have some kind of caffeine to help get through this next hour. And we were adding in some white a little bit ago, and we're layering some pink over it. We're trying to reshape the petals in that upper left-hand corner. I know you can't see a lot of it because of the way the camera's set up and the fact that I am right-handed. Can't see me physically doing it, but you are seeing the results. Isn't that great? And like I mentioned multiple times before, we are getting into that stage now where I'm going to end up reshaping a fuck ton of the petals. Excuse my language, but it's going to be pretty much all the petals are going to be completely reshaped, recolored, and this translucent quality I have right now, it's going to be kind of gone. And by kind of gone, I mean completely obliterated. I know we talked quite a bit about spray fixative earlier. There is one thing I did leave out, which I'm going to mention now. This is a good thing about having a long video, is I remember stuff randomly throughout with my scatterbrained ass. When you use spray fixative, it does change the quality of the color. It dulls it out quite a bit, usually. It depends on the brand and whatnot, but it's a pretty typical occurrence with pretty much any spray fixative you use. And that's the trade-off. If you don't use that spray fixative, nothing's gonna really stick. You can easily just wipe your hand across it and all your work's gone. And I'd rather have something that's more permanent than something that stays brighter, personally. It's up to you. By no means is anything I say in this video a hard and fast rule. It's just to give advice for what works for me. Just sharing my tiny bit of experience to add to your knowledge, which might actually be vaster than mine. I don't know. I don't know who you are. Adding in more of that indigo blue to get in some of the deeper darks towards the bottom petals of the flower. It's really important to have some really nice deep darks. Just gonna keep saying deep darks over and over again. You need to have some really nice dark spots and some really nice light spots in order to build more contrast. Typically, the more contrast you have in a piece, the better it looks. It can make it look more realistic. It can also just make it more visually arresting. It makes it stand out that giant leap more. Getting that contrast is actually far more important than having the exact correct colors for what you visually see. I know there are a lot of people who try to match what they physically see with what they're putting down on paper, and they kind of freak themselves out about it pretty hardcore sometimes. You don't necessarily need to do that. I mean, they do have all sorts of apps where you can use an eyedropper tool if it's from a photo, and you can kind of match it up. And I know there are some more old-fashioned methods of using a sort of viewfinder where you use a paint chip. Well, not necessarily a paint chip, you use a paint sample and you put it next to the area you're looking at so you can visually do that better. I don't really do either of those methods because I'm not necessarily trying to perfectly emulate the colors that I'm physically seeing. I'm trying to get more of the spirit of the colors. Typically in my brain they're much, much brighter. The spirit of the colors. Sound like a hippie right now, but I'm cool with that. One of my favorite art class critiques I've ever had was at a community college after I dropped out of art school. Was that the colors in my drawing looked like they were vibrating. That made me very happy inside. I'll take that. Blue pencil for more definition. And to keep adding in some of those darks. Using blues in those shadows, the main reason I'm doing it is because I have that blue in the background. As I said earlier, it does make the piece more cohesive, but it also mimics how light naturally works. If you have something near something blue like that, it will pick up on that color. And you'll see it even with skin when there's certain light used, that it will reflect certain colors depending on the lighting. Any object you have will do that. So yeah, there's more than one reason than it being just a cohesive piece. basically. It mimics reality. But what is reality? Using yellow to get some of the striations on the petals of the flowers, and we are using white to further define some of the edges of those petals as well. They're starting to look a heck of a lot more petally in certain parts. I'm pretty sure petally isn't a word, but it's going to be a word today. Because making up words is my specialty, and I do what I want. Putting down some of that black into where we already have the blue in order to deepen up that shadow that I'm trying to create there. That was a pale peach that we used there, and we're putting some yellow right over it. Sorry if you just heard that sneeze. My cats are both in the room with me right now. One is hiding underneath me and sneezing. The reason he is hiding underneath me is the bigger one pounced him, and apparently I am protection enough to make it stop. Yep, this is my life. It's not even 6 yet. They are very energized at this time in the morning. From like 4 to 7. It's their go time. So we are just switching between colors, doing more layering. A lot of this is just layering more and more, over and over again, till it's done. And there are other parts where I just wave around a pastel while I'm deciding what the hell I'm doing. I just redefined some lower petals to give more an effect of them actually being layered. I tried going in between some of the little kind of hairy bits on that stem with black for the background to kind of make it stand out more. Our reddish brown makes a couple of appearances here and there as well. Also using some green over that red. So once again, complementary colors helps create a softer, more dulled out shadow color. You can also do it with yellow and purple, and blue and orange, or sometimes blue and burnt umber. That actually works better than orange usually. And that reddish brown's being used as an almost mid-tone shade. For certain petals, I am starting to add in more detailing, like I just did with that one there, where we're putting in some of those folds and striations and lines and just all that stuff that makes a flower look like a flower. Certain parts, the decision-making process, especially towards the end, gets easier, and therefore the work gets quicker. You'll notice that I bang out a good chunk of this much more quickly in certain parts from here on closer to the end too. It's because a lot of the major decisions have already been made, and I'm just kind of filling in those little extra details. Everyone should be happy because we have less than an hour left to go. Yay! Redefining a lot of those outside lines with white and throwing in other colors. Also going in between the different petals with the background indigo blue color to define those outside lines more. And we are mostly on the detailing stage right now. We're adding in a little bit more shading, but most of what we're doing is just adding in those little extra lines, which I know I've said a couple times, little folds inside each petal. And I know I said this towards the beginning of the video, but you know, it's been a long one, so I'm just gonna say it again. The only time you really need to worry about your lines and doing a more sure one is when it's something you want to remain there. If it's something you plan on blending out, since these are chalk pastels, you can be as rough and as scrawly and as messy as you want to be, because you're just gonna blend it and you're just gonna layer on top of it more and more. So you can kind of be sloppy if you want at certain points, but if you want something tight that you're not planning on blending, you need to take it a little more slowly and have a more definite idea of where you're going with it. And we just messed with the stem a little bit more. I added in a little bit of peach in there to add more of a natural looking highlight, not just a bright white one. I'm still trying to keep some of that translucence to the petals. I know I lose it a little bit, but with a lot of the white and then going over it, I am still attempting to keep that effect going on. We want to make it look as though there is some light shining above the petals and kind of through the petals. I feel like I'm saying petals a lot. Still just refining some of those outlines, and again, some of the lines that are inside the petals. I know I'm saying a lot of not so different things throughout, but a lot of this is just going to be repetition, doing the same steps a couple of different times in slightly different ways, and readjusting. And we're using a kind of deeper, mid-ranged purpley pink, kind of a magenta. Just add in another color and another transition shade. Sorry, I must have bumped the camera a couple times there. I did see it bump a little bit. Yellow is one of my favorite colors to use, especially that kind of bright, almost cadmium yellow hue. I think it just adds a lot of life to any piece that it's brought into. And it plays off that indigo blue background really, really well. I do want to point out how fine of lines you can actually get with the pastel stick sometimes. I do like using the pencils for some detail work, but you don't need them necessarily. You can definitely do it with just the pastel sticks. You can always use a box cutter and an X-Acto knife to sharpen it to be a really, really sharp edge, especially if you just break it in half or in a quarter. So that way you're not wasting the whole pastel stick or sharpening the whole thing, but you can just sharpen a little piece of it and use it kind of as a miniature pencil in order to get super fine lines. You don't need all the supplies I have here. I just am, like a lot of artists, kind of an art supplies hoarder, because I like trying different supplies, playing around with it, and kind of figuring out what I can do with it. Experimentation with art supplies is honestly one of my favorite things in the world. Unless it's sculpture or some other form of 3D art. For some reason, my brain can't handle that. And here I'm using a mid-range blue pencil. When I said mid-range blue, it's just kind of like a primary blue. Not a dark one, not a light one, but because of the colors I'm adding it to, it can affect, obviously, how it lays down, because they mix together, obviously. One of the things that you do have to be aware of with pastel pencils is obviously because it's a much softer medium than graphite is, you do have to sharpen them more often. And you do have to be careful with what kind of sharpener you use. You can always use an X-Acto knife like you can with any pencil. And you can also use a general sharpener because the same company that makes the pencils makes a sharpener specifically for those. You can also use other sharpeners. You just want to make sure that the pencil actually fits inside and that it actually sharpens it correctly. I'm sorry if you hear like some crying or whining noises or thumping in the background. It is apparently playtime for the cats again. You're welcome. This is what happens when you have a Savannah mix and you have an Abyssinian mix. They kind of both are breeds that have a lot of energy and just need to play and chase each other a lot. It was much worse when we just had the Savannah. He had all this energy that he just could not use. And we tried to get a harness on him to take walks and he wiggled the heck out of it and almost choked himself. I know this has nothing to do with the art video, but something to talk about. Whatever. And again, congratulations for making it this far. We have about 33 minutes to go till we're done. Once again, thank you for spending this time with me. I know it's a long video, and if you've made it this far, you're a champ. Honestly, you are, because even recording this video, it wears on me, so I can't imagine watching it. At this point, I am just redefining some of those lower petals, the longer ones, with that more magenta color again. And using the indigo blue to kind of break them up a little bit more. And since we're getting closer to the end, I am throwing in a bit more straight up white. A lot of what I was using previously was like a light pink or light peach or even a beigey cream color. And now we're just using pure white. don't do what I just did. It's usually not a good idea to just have a pencil chilling on your drawing like that, especially with something like pastel where it can be very easily disturbed. Good job, Krista. Good job. There we go. Moved it out of the way a little bit. I don't know if this happens with anyone else, but I know sometimes when I'm creating, I get very into the zone and I kind of don't pay as much attention to where I have all the supplies. I try to keep it within reach, but sometimes I keep it a little too close to what I'm working on. And it can make some mistakes happen. But because I'm so zoomed in on what I'm doing and I'm so focused in on that, I tend to just not notice that I'm doing those things. Does that happen to anyone else, or is it just me? A nice thing of doing that background first is that way it's going to pick up a little bit of that blue. And I know I've said it before, but once again, that does mimic how the light would work if there was that much indigo blue in the background. So it just adds a little bit more depth to it again. It's also nice that it mixes in with that blue, because that way you just don't have straight up white. It's the same with the things on the petals. I'm using a straight up white over it, but because it's mixing in with that pink on the drawing, it's not going to look like straight up white. And I'm using that peach pencil to not just refine certain parts but to add a transition to smooth out the shading a little bit more. I do like how that blue kind of blends into an almost periwinkle shade when I layer it over the pink. It's really nice. And a lot of laying over the colors for this is very similar to a glazing technique in oil paint or acrylic paint or even watercolor paint. The only difference is that with those, you usually wait until it dries and then you put the color over. With this, because it is already a dry medium and it's a super blendable medium, it automatically blends in slightly and you can still blend it in later. With the glazing techniques with the other mediums mentioned, it is literally just kind of leaving a light enough layer to be able to see through to the color underneath, and that gives a perception of it being a different color. We're using a similar idea here, but the media does react differently. That background was getting kind of rough looking because you could definitely see the strokes I was using to make it, so we're just trying to blend it down a little bit right now, and then fixing the petals and the other pieces that are in between. You can't really see it on camera, but a lot of the pink residue did get on that background. So we blended it out in order to help with some of the roughness that we had, but now we're going over with the blue again in order to get the depth of that indigo blue back. As an aside, I do want to point out that this drawing is only 8 by 10 inches, so it is a smaller drawing, and I am using pastel, which is a quicker medium. It's much quicker and easier to use than, say, oil paint, but it still took over 3 hours to do a pretty small drawing. I just want to point out how much time and effort that goes into art in general. To make something like this is kind of a shorter drawing. It didn't take as long as some other ones I've done, because I've done some that obviously I've put like 40, 50, 60 hours into. But I hope this is kind of a window into the fact that the process is long. Artists spend a lot of time perfecting their craft and creating, and we might never reach an end goal of it being perfect, but it's more about that journey. I wanted to mostly point out the amount of time it takes, because I know a lot of people out there diminish what artists do. And I think that's just out of, I don't want to say ignorance, but I'm going to say ignorance. They have a lack of knowledge about the process, probably because they've never really done it. And I think a video like this kind of shows or gives an insight into, at least for me, what my process is and how long it can take. And I think it extends to a lot of other artists too. There are some artists who could do this quicker than I can, and there's some that can do it and take longer than I did. But every piece takes time, and learning each of the skills takes time. So respect the artists to pay them, but also realize that if this is a hobby you do want to do, it is going to take a lot of time in order for you to learn anything and to get your skill to any level that you want it to be at. End of side note. At this section, I'm just outlining a lot of the petals with that indigo blue. That's all I'm doing. Adding in a couple colors back and forth to kind of blend it out a little bit. I do end up blending this out a lot later, but I'm just doing this out a little bit more definition and to separate those petals just that tiny bit more. I again want to emphasize that this is just my process, this is how I use pastels. There are a couple different ways to do them. A lot of people love doing kind of a sketchy, loose approach, which can be very, very beautiful, amazing. And if that's more the way you want to go, that's a completely acceptable way to do it. And it can be a very beautiful way to do it. The fun thing about art is that we all have our own interpretations about how something should look, and each of those is pretty valid. I'm not saying you shouldn't be open to criticism, because criticism's there just to help you grow. There's constructive criticism, and then there's the you suck, die criticism. The you suck, die criticism is just worthless, so just ignore that. And there might be some constructive criticism that someone gives you that has no part in what you're doing, and you just don't have any desire to do it. I know I did a painting of a silent film actress, and someone said that I should add jewelry to her neck. And in the reference photo, she didn't have any jewelry on her neck. But not just that, for the time period, it just wasn't something that really happened. A lot of it was about that long neck, and using jewelry would have covered it up. It's criticism. It's valid criticism too, because I agree it would probably look better, but it would conflict with the intent of what I was presenting. So, long story short, be open to criticism, but also just do what you want to do, man. I do what I want. You should be able to do it too. We have hit the 3-hour mark. We now have less than 15 minutes to go. Once again, if you're still here, thank you very much for hanging out with me. Hopefully you learned some stuff, and hopefully you've had fun. I've had fun. And if you have any questions, comments, feelings you want to share, just comment down below. I'm kind of a hermit. I'd love to be able to interact with some people online. Just let me know what you think and what questions you might have. We are definitely to the down to the wire stage here, where we are just adding the tiniest little details. And I'm just finishing her up. Using more of the indigo blue to outline, we are just getting all those last minute ending details that are just going to make this pop that little bit more. Even though I don't really draw flowers that much anymore, I tend to just draw them when I'm feeling bummed during winter time. A seasonal affective disorder, so when it gets icky outside, I like to draw some nice, pretty, colorful flowers in order to kind of brighten my spirits up. I haven't really done it in a couple years, but despite the fact that I haven't done that many flower drawings lately and that I don't use pastels as much as I used to, I'm still pretty happy with how this turned out. I think it ends up being pretty decent. I am putting this video on YouTube, but I think these ones where they aren't sped up and they're not time-lapse are mostly going to be posted on my Patreon. Just because it takes longer, much longer than narrating and editing a slightly shorter video. And by slightly shorter, I mean a 30-minute video versus a 3-hour video. If you want to do that and you want to see more videos like this, I do start as low as $1 on Patreon, and at $5 you get a free sticker once a month. But if you don't have the money to do that, please don't feel pressured to. I'll still have videos on here that are about 30 minutes long that have a narration about stuff I did in the process. It's just not going to be quite as in depth because obviously it can't be, because it's not going to be nearly as long. I will leave a link to my Patreon down below, and like I said, if you can't afford it, please do. If you cannot, don't worry about it. If you can't afford to spend money on a Patreon, please just like the video, leave comments below. Even if you dislike the video, hit that dislike button. Do all that fun stuff. We are definitely getting to the end of the road on this drawing here. I just wanted to let you know what my intention was, because doing editing on this 3-hour video has taken me about 6 times as long, especially with the narration and everything, and editing out any stagnant spots and all that fun stuff. I'm now adding in just more of that pure white and then blending it out with a little bit of a peach color. Just adding a little bit more contrast to make that drawing poppin'. I once again want to thank you for hanging out with me. We have about 3 more minutes left in the video. If you liked the video, please like it, blah blah blah. I said all this stuff already just a couple minutes ago, but I do appreciate you spending the time to watch it and kind of listen to me ramble. So thank you again. I hope you learned something. I hope that this makes you want to create something too. And even if you don't want to create, I hope it gave you an idea of what the artistic process actually looks like in its entirety. Hope you have a great day and just keep on keeping on.